The following clip is from the North to South Show, live every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where we talk SEC football everything. Now, we'd love to have you out for next show, but for now, hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this clip. Talking about some of the most underrated SEC games of all of this season, because I kind of went through the games. I did a video on the top 10 games in terms of like magnitude and how much it means to the SEC championship race. I already did that video. I did my video on which games I think will be the CBS primetime games. And I just got a bad taste in my mouth after making both of those two videos. Not that I didn't enjoy making them, not that I don't think you guys didn't like them, but there were just so many great and quality games that were missed on that list, on both of those lists, because they just aren't nationally respected as games. Both of those teams that might be going at it just aren't both nationally respected. And that's what I want to do in this video, kind of do some cleanup and go through some of the games that I think have the potential to be very underrated games and still very good games, although you may not think that they are going to be some of the greatest games of the season. So let's start off. I have my first game that starts off on week 2. This is actually the first SEC game of the whole season. I have Missouri traveling to Kroger Field to take on the Kentucky Wildcats. I think this is the race for probably, in my educated opinion, of course, both of these teams, fans have strong arguments on why I am wrong about this, but I think this is the race for the third place team in the SEC East right now. Kentucky and Missouri are definitely looking at to be those two teams. Now, I definitely think that both of these teams have a shot at Florida. I don't think Florida is some crazy beast that is untakeable or unbeatable this season. I think both of these teams definitely have the potential to go out and do that, but the fact that we get this week 2, it's going to be the first SEC game of the season. It's just interesting to see how these two teams play out, because it's either one of these teams, it seems like every year in the SEC East, is going to be the surprising team or the shocking team that season. Because you look last year, Missouri actually had a really good season last year. You look a couple years before that, you look to the, 2018 season when Kentucky had like their 11-win season. These two teams are always surprising people, always shocking people, year in and year out. To have that week 2 and to have Missouri traveling to Kentucky, I think will definitely be one of the most underrated games of this whole season. So that was my first one. Second one, I have the game that I've already mentioned that we're going to talk about later in this show today. I have Texas A&M and Arkansas. I already talked about this game. I have this game as my CBS primetime game in week 4. I just feel like this is underrated because this is the game that you're going to get after the Alabama-Florida one. Obviously, that is the first CBS game. It's going to be your first primetime game, so that's going to have so much hype. And then you just look forward to the next week, and you see Texas A&M and Arkansas on that schedule for CBS 3:30, and you're just like, man, that's no Alabama. Those aren't two programs like Alabama and Florida going at it. We get Texas A&M, Arkansas every single season. This game is in Arlington, Arlington, which is next to Dallas, where obviously the Dallas Cowboys play at AT&T Stadium. So it's an interesting neutral site here. But I think just the fact that it's in AT&T Stadium, both of these teams are young, and I don't think either of these teams by this point will have their set identity and their set trajectory for the rest of the season at this point. I think that this game will tell a lot about what both of these teams are going into for the rest of the season. This is both of these teams' first SEC game of the season. Obviously, Texas A&M is already going to have a minor, major, whatever you want to call it, a mid-major road game going to Colorado. You're going to have Arkansas, who has Texas coming in. They've already played them. I think both of those games are week 2, unless Texas A&M might play Colorado week 3. Have to check back on my helmet grid for that one. But I think that for this being both of these teams' first SEC games, you have two young quarterbacks going into their first SEC games, playing in probably the nicest stadium in all the NFL, especially last season. The score, yes, however you want to call the game, Arkansas did score 14 points in the fourth quarter, but Arkansas, in my opinion, got better as the season went on, so it could be a very, very interesting game. Even though I do think Texas A&M is the better team in this scenario, I'm looking for this to actually be a very interesting game. Next up, I have LSU traveling to Kentucky. You're going to see a bit of Kentucky on this list because they didn't get put in any of my primetime games. They didn't get put in any of my top 10 games. But I still feel like Kentucky will put together some really competitive and good games this season. And that's why I have it when LSU travels to Kentucky. Last time that LSU traveled to Kentucky, it was 2007 when LSU was the number 1 seed. Obviously, they got beat in overtime in a shocker there. I think LSU and Kentucky are, I don't want to say evenly matched teams, but if you look division-wise, if you take out the players and stats and everything like that and just pure power rankings, if you cross-divisionalize these guys and just look at, you have your SEC division number ones, you'll have Alabama and Georgia. You have your SEC division number twos, you'll have Texas A&M, Florida. And then I think LSU and Kentucky are probably your number 3 team. So you have the number 3 team in each conference going at it. I think that this could make for a really interesting game because we know the talent that LSU is capable of having this season. Will they be able to perform in this game? This game is in week 6. Obviously, it's still kind of early in the season. You'll have kind of an identity of what this team is going to be by then, but still, it's early. Things can change. This LSU game team coming into this Kentucky this week in week 6, I feel like could be a very interesting game. And Kentucky's always, again, I've already talked on them. I don't need to explain it that much. Always a team that is able to surprise you each and every year. So very interesting game there. LSU at Kentucky. I'm going another game. Week 7, we have a week 7 game. A rematch of a really good game last season. Auburn at Arkansas. Now, this game was obviously in Auburn last season. Very interesting how this game ended because we all know Bo Nix with the backwards snap or backwards QB spike obviously should have been ruled as a fumble, wasn't, and then Auburn goes out and nails however long field goal is a decent shot, and Auburn goes out and wins the game. So Arkansas fans are obviously going to have a bad taste in their mouth, and they're going to remember that game when they come into Arkansas. Auburn does, obviously. Very interesting scenario here because you're going to have KJ Jefferson going up against whoever the Auburn QB is. I think Arkansas is a very underrated team this season. And I said if Arkansas does make a bowl game, this will probably be a win for Arkansas. So I think that this game will be really competitive and a game that I definitely shouldn't be overlooked. If I'm an Auburn fan, I do not want to be overlooking that Arkansas game. No matter how confident you feel in that game, I feel like traveling to Arkansas, and I feel like this Arkansas team will be pumped up for that game. So that, in my opinion, is going to be a very underrated game. Next week, I got week 12, or I got 2 in week 12. This one, I've already talked about a bit. This was one of my primetime games. I think that this occurred in both videos, but I still think it's underwhelming for both of those videos because I didn't rank this one high. I think this was the 9th best game in my SEC games ranked, and then this was week 12 primetime game just because there wasn't really anything better on. But I have Florida traveling to Missouri. Again, kind of like the Missouri and Kentucky game, this could kind of be the battle for second place in the SEC East this season. I also thought about putting Florida and Kentucky in this list, but I ultimately didn't obviously because that would have already come up. But Florida versus Kentucky, what am I talking about? Not Florida versus Kentucky. Florida at Missouri. Again, battle for the second place in the SEC. We're going to have a good idea of how both of these teams' seasons are going. Obviously, this could be a completely different scenario from this time right now, June 16th, 2021. This game is not happening till late November, so still lots to be said about both of these teams. So this game could be a complete blowout for either one of these teams. But right now, looking at how I feel about both teams right now, I think this is going to be a really competitive game. And then another game I have in week 12, had to throw in one of my Gamecocks games, the game that I'm probably most excited for all season, Auburn coming back to South Carolina for another game. We played them last year. We won last year. It was a very good defensive showing, but obviously our whole team, but specifically J.C. Horn, had an amazing game. Mike Bobo comes back to South Carolina. The fans are going to be charged about that. Lots of people, there's huge arguments about who's a better running back, Tank Bigsby or Kevin Harris, or maybe even add Marshawn Lloyd in there. Lots of great storylines for this game, and this is personally a game that I'm very excited for. I know that it might not be on your list as an average SEC fan because South Carolina and Auburn, or I'd say more South Carolina isn't that team, especially this season, that's really going to jump out at you when you see them playing, let's say, Georgia or Florida or anything like that. But a couple years down the road, that's where I'm looking at, and that's where I have Shane Beamer getting this team to, where South Carolina is a team that is going to start to get more primetime games. So I'm a very hopeful fan, but for this season, I think that will be a very underrated game. Lots of great storylines, and I think that this will also be a great and competitive game. Finishing up my last one, I have week 13, so this is rivalry week. This is a game that is being played on a Friday night, already declared as a CBS game, Missouri at Arkansas. Now, Missouri at Arkansas, or Arkansas at Missouri last season, provided us with one of the best games in the SEC all of last season. I was close to putting this as my number one game out of the whole season last year, out of the whole SEC season last year. Ultimately, though, I had to give it to Florida versus LSU. Like, that game was way too good. Just everything that was on the line. If there was more on the line in that Arkansas-Missouri game last season, I think that would have probably jumped it. But this game, that has nothing to do with what took away from this game last season, because the game last season was unbelievable. If you didn't watch it, I didn't watch it. I was watching. I can't remember what game I was watching that week, but I didn't watch it. I watched the highlights and everything. Basically, I can't remember. Arkansas had the ball late. They go down and they have to go for 2 or something like that. They score a touchdown. They have to go down and go for 2 to tie the game up. Or it was even to take the lead. I can't remember. I got to rejog my memory on that. But Arkansas goes for a 2-point conversion, and literally the Missouri player has the ball in his hands in the end zone to basically pick it off and seal the game off. But the Arkansas defender, offensive receiver, literally rips it out of his hands to be able to score the 2-point conversion. And then Missouri marches down the field and kicks a game-winning field goal. Unbelievable game, a very high-scoring game. I think it finished out like 50-48, something like that. I think it was exactly 50-48, but that was an amazing game. And a game that should be no different this year because it's being played on a Friday night. We got some high school football vibes going on there. It's going to be a very, very exciting game when we have Missouri traveling to Arkansas. And I have a couple Arkansas games on here. I have a couple of Kentucky games, a couple Missouri. You can start to see a couple Auburn. A lot of these teams that really aren't getting the hype that I'd say that they deserve this season, but I think teams that are still going to be very, very competitive and provide some very, very great games on this list. So I felt like after I made those 2 other videos talking about the best games of the season and the primetime games of the season, there were still some teams that I was like, these teams deserve some more limelight. They deserve some more spotlight on them, and they deserve to be shown that they are going to be a competitive team this year and have some amazing games. So that's why I wanted to put this list together. And I think going through, looking back at the helmet schedule and everything, I think I did a pretty good job at this.